Hello and welcome to Republic IAS. Today in this session we will look at this raging hijab controversy in Karnataka. As you are familiar, this issue has started in Udupi and of course spread to a number of other towns and districts in Karnataka, and the entire nation is actually now of course curiously waiting for the verdict of Karnataka High Court. Now, let us take stock of this issue. Now, first you are familiar, this issue involves actually a number of facets of human life. It involves religion or freedom of religion, it includes a right to education, it also includes the right of women, and of course it also includes the role of education as an instrument of transformation. So, in this context let us look at this. Now, first what we do is we look at the constitutional framework with respect to the freedom of religion. Remember, freedom of religion is one of the 6 fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution. The relevant articles you are familiar, article 25 to 28, which protect both the individual as well as community religious rights. And of course, this is supplemented by the Supreme Court ruling in Shirur Mutt case 1954, in which the court had actually propounded the essentiality test. Please recall, essentiality test is applied in resolving disputes between in the context of conflict between fundamental rights and religious practices. Now, apart from freedom of religion, right to education is also involved here under article 21A. So, free and compulsory education from 6 to 14 years under article 21A. This apart, there is also a dimension involved with respect to right to equality under article 14. Remember, any decision which is not fair, just and transparent would attract article 14 for being arbitrary, which actually amounts to a violation of right to equality under article 14. Now, what we do is we look at religion as an institution. Remember, religion as a social institution has historically essentially thrived on some, of course, fundamental human values, but over a period of time these human values degenerate into dogmatic practices, upheld by the entrenched stakeholders within each religion. Now, please remember, no religion is immune to such entrenched dogmatic practices. For instance, now for whatever reason a practice actually evolves in a religion, eventually sometimes it becomes it violates individual human values. So, what happens is in the name of community rights, such individual rights actually stand violated. Now, I think some very good recent examples could be triple talaq or temple entry restrictions. Now, both of these from two different religions, though asserted by each religion as their community right, but each of these practice violates individual human rights. So, you are familiar, in both cases of course adjudication went up to the Supreme Court. So, essentially in the context of these religious practices, what comes first, whether fundamental rights of the community or the fundamental rights of the individuals? Generally a religious community prioritizes community rights over individual rights. Then moving on, we look at the status of women in Indian society in the context of cultural and religious practices, and remember, each religion is actually the foundation of cultural practices. Now, most religions do not treat women as equal to men, and because of this unequal treatment of women, a number of individual rights stand violated with respect to women. Now, these examples could be child marriages, denial of right to property to women, or denying access to education for women, or even denial of right to work, etc., for women. Then if we take up education as an institution, there are actually some extremely relevant issues here. Remember, historically education had been an instrument of social transformation, and remember, in a society where social stratification or privileged sections and underprivileged sections actually have been noticed in different parts of the world, denial of education had led to such privileges and lack of privileges or exclusion from the mainstream of the society. So, in modern times, education actually is an instrument which promotes the human values of equality, fraternity, civic sense, and these values are imbibed and inculcated in the classrooms. And in fact, it is often said that the destiny of a nation is actually shaped in its classrooms. Then what is actually very important is that education as a tool to eliminating privileges is very, very important. Now, education it empowers, enriches the individual as also enriches the entire society. For these reasons, access to education must be universal, must be free, at least up to some period. So, I mean, in this controversy, education, access to education also is an important dimension. So, I think these are the, I mean, this is the context in which the hijab controversy can be discussed and understood properly. Now, remember, essentially this hijab controversy, what is the crux of the problem? What is the crux of the current debate? Whether students can actually wear hijab in classrooms. Now, please remember, these religious symbols, the use of religious symbols in classrooms. Now, you are familiar, the Karnataka Education Act 1983 prohibits that. It insists on the right of the management to prescribe a uniform for its students. So, if the management decides, it can insist on a particular kind of uniform. So, a student should adhere to such regulations of the management. Now, the current debate is a group of students actually insist on wearing that hijab. So, this is actually prohibited, on the ground that cultural symbols or religious symbols must not actually be used in the classroom. So, now let us look at for example, major global practices which insisted on neutral identities in public places. Now, one of, I think, such extraordinary examples is Turkey. You are familiar, Ottoman Turkish Empire, which collapsed soon after the First World War, was transformed under Kemal Pasha. He declared through a constitution in 1924 Turkey a republic, abolishing Ottoman Turkish Empire, also the Caliphate, which is the temporal and spiritual head of the entire Muslim community in the world. So, after declaring Turkey a republic, he had also abolished cultural or religious practices in public places, and he also prescribed, for instance, dress code in public places, even for instance not wearing a beard, for instance in Turkey. So, in a way, Turkey was completely modernized in 1920s and 30s under Kemal Pasha. And actually, interestingly, all this Kamal Pasha had actually achieved without much resistance from the Turkish people. Another major example for such neutralization of cultural identities in public places is France. Now, you are familiar, France follows a system called laicity, under which France insists on neutral identities in public places, in workplaces, in education, in public places, etc. So much so that it prohibits the use of hijab or other religious attire. So, these two are I think extraordinary examples, and please remember, if you recall, there had actually been a lot of friction in France over the last 10 years or so, especially for its insistence on prohibition of cultural identities in public places, and France had also witnessed, for instance, violent religious even terrorist attacks in the recent past on this issue. So, now what is the way out? I think one best prescription we can refer to is Jawaharlal Nehru's prescription. You could be familiar in the context of drafting our constitution in the late 1940s. Jawaharlal Nehru had actually come up with a concept called living traditions versus dead traditions. Now, dead traditions, according to Nehru, are those traditions in a religion which become dogmatic, which have no relevance in modern times, and which violate fundamental human values. So, those traditions must be abandoned by that religion. For instance, sati. Now, since sati violates right to life, such traditions must be given up. On the other hand, living traditions are those traditions which do not violate any fundamental human values. So, there is nothing wrong in holding on to such living traditions compared with dead traditions. So, if you apply this talisman to the current debate, what is important is in any modern democracy, people should actually embrace living traditions and give up dead traditions. So, you can apply, for instance, this prescription to any such controversy, whether it is, for instance, triple talaq or Sabarimalai temple issue. So, what is the way forward with respect to the hijab controversy? Now, please remember, already hijab issue has snowballed into a major controversy at the national level. I think the entire nation is trying to what you call calm down so that this issue does not escalate into a major crisis. Now, the challenge before us is that we must find a solution that ensures that individual freedoms are actually respected, at the same time community freedoms are also respected, and at the same time we must also ensure the unity and integrity of the nation while protecting the dignity of the individual as asserted in the preamble to the Constitution of India itself. Now, specifically, what is the solution? Now, in schools which are actually identity neutral, which are supposed to promote that civic sense, which groom these children into tomorrow's responsible citizens. It is important that students must be socialized into secular values rather than religious values or specific cultural values. So, and please remember, education or a classroom is an equal place. Now, irrespective of a student's background, whether very rich, very poor, coming from this religion, coming from that religion. Now, a classroom actually ignores all such factors. What it should promote is that sense of fraternity among the students, sense of responsibility towards the society and towards the nation. So, the problem is if one community I mean attempts to use its own religious identities in classroom, every other community may demand such similar privileges for itself. So, if we allow that neutral civic sense is lost. A student is socialized into or as a part of a religious identity rather than as an Indian first or as a human being first. So, I think that right of the schools to prescribe uniform of their choice must be respected. And please remember, this does not mean denying religious rights, it only means please keep away religion from the classrooms. Now, except classroom, I think every citizen, everybody should be free to for instance whatever religious identity or cultural identity one wants to project in all other public places, for instance, except in schools, because in schools it is a formative stage where those impressionable minds are actually shaped. So, that civic responsibility must be promoted. And now, while actually doing this, it is important to remember that while promoting constitutional morality, it is also very, very important that customary morality should not be suddenly abandoned, because sometimes what happens is a backlash may actually ensue. Now, similar backlash, for instance, we are familiar with historically during social religious reform movements in modern India, as also even in very contemporary period, I think with respect to Sabarimala or other such issues. So, any effort to promote constitutional morality replacing customary morality should be subject to the maintenance of public order in case there is a backlash. So, now how do we actually address this problem? I think the only solution is to ensure that people are first educated in the constitutional values. They are imbibed, they imbibe the constitutional values first. They should be prepared for embracing constitutional values. Only then I think they will be ready to accept such secular values. So, any strict enforcement should be preceded by education of people, especially in schools, of modern constitutional values. Only then I think we would be able to come up with a satisfactory solution to the current hijab controversy. And I think going by the Karnataka High Court's what you call interim order, you are familiar, the Karnataka High Court has actually ordered that no religious attire should be used in classrooms till its final order. So, with this we conclude the session, and friends, please this video should be supplemented with the notes that you are just actually watching, and this is extremely useful for answer writing. You do not require any more concepts or content for this. I think you please go through it multiple times, you will get a very good perspective. Thank you. Keep watching such videos as and when we post them. Thank you. Bye bye.